May 8, 1942. Lieutenant Swede Vedesa, in an SBD Dauntless dive bomber, is dogfighting 3 Japanese Zero fighters. Something it was never designed to do. 2 enemy Zeros have Swede locked in from in front and behind. But now, a third is diving on him from 3 o'clock high. The Zero dives on Swede as he jinks aggressively to fend off attacks from the other 2 Zeros. The Japanese unleash hundreds of rounds. Some slice through Vedesa's fuselage. The top SBD keeps flying. Supreme mastery of his aircraft has kept Swede alive. But in the tight turns, he fights to keep his hands and feet at the controls. At times, his body weighs over 1,000 pounds.
I was jerking that airplane and pushing it hard, diving wide open. And same thing on negative Gs, positive Gs.
So as Lieutenant Vedesa is fending off these attacks from the Zeros, he's just aggressively maneuvering his aircraft, which is going to put a lot of forces on the body. A lot of G's, positive and negative, so seat in the pants and then floating in your straps, followed by slips, kicking around the cockpit.
The violent turns stymie the enemy attacks, but in the back seat, the rear gunner cannot fire. Near blacking out in the 9G turns, he can barely keep his head up, much less aim his .30 cal.
The problem being, he's strapped in, and the maneuvers were so violent that he couldn't swing the gun. He couldn't get into position.
So after fending off multiple attacks, basically he's just trying to force those Japanese Zeros into making a mistake.
The mistake Swede is looking for is in the Zero's turn. After each head-on pass, the enemy pilot must make an extremely tight turn. If it's too loose, Swede's own turn will put him on the Zero's tail. The maneuvers continue, and Swede waits for a moment to strike. The fight has gone on for an agonizing 17 minutes. In the high G turns, his heart pounds in his chest, struggling to pump blood to his extremities. His muscles ache against the physical exhaustion of combat. Vedesa must go on the offensive.
On one particular one, he went out a little bit farther, and I was able to pull up on his tail.
It's a fatal mistake. Vedesa pounces.
And I felt I got a pretty good burst on him. I see at this time he's smoking, so I figured it must have hit him.
Swede Vedesa's gotten in a lethal counterpunch, but there's still 2 Zeros in the air. One screams in for another vertical pass. As the enemy pilot pulls up out of his dive, Swede sees an opening and goes for it. He pitches up, bringing his guns to bear.
I was able to pull up into almost a vertical, and he was close at hand. He's at an angle, and he's making a turn up there, and I came up practically on his beam, and I got in a good burst on him, and then I stalled and dropped away.
Vedesa recovers from the stall. The burning Zero falls from the sky, barely missing the SBD as it plunges towards the sea. After evading repeated Japanese attacks with 2 bold maneuvers, Vedesa has almost evened the odds. Only 1 Zero remains.
This was a fight to the death. He's out to kill me, and I'm going to get him.
Vedesa in his slow dive bomber is here. The agile Zero is here, wheeling around on Vedesa for a final decisive head-on pass.
He turned around, and he came back at me. And I thought at this time he'd been firing so many times, that guy must be out of ammunition.
But Vedesa is wrong. The Zero is still lobbing cannon shells at the SBD. He skids left, dodging the Zero's lethal fire.
But he kept coming. I knew at that time he intended to crash me.
The suicidal Japanese pilot barrels in, bent on ramming Swede's SBD.
At the last moment, I jerked the airplane, went into a vertical, and then rolled back. And as I rolled back, there was this tremendous clap as we passed. I knew I saw something fly off, and I thought, my God, I lost an aileron.
Miraculously, Vedesa has survived a mid-air collision with the Zero.
You would think that two aircraft closing at those speeds, probably combined closure rate of almost 500 miles an hour, and then any parts of the aircraft touching, you think it would be catastrophic for both aircraft. As it turns out, the ruggedness of the SBD ripped apart the Japanese Zero.
I turned back on his tail, all right, and he's smoking. And he dove into the cloud about 1,000 feet below, and he disappeared. That was the end of the dogfight.
After knocking out 3 Zeros with a lone dive bomber, Swede Vedesa lands back on the Yorktown a hero. He is awarded the Navy Cross for his actions.
Well, we often say in this business that we stand on the backs of giants. And no kidding, Lieutenant Vedesa is one of those giants to be able to execute the feat that he executed that day.
Outnumbered American fighter pilots battle marauding Japanese airmen to control the skies over a sweltering Pacific island called Guadalcanal. During a grueling 6-month slugfest, their combat in the sky will help decide the course of the Pacific War. August 7th, 1942, America launches its first amphibious assault of World War II. Over 11,000 U.S. Marines storm ashore at Guadalcanal. The Marines quickly gain a foothold on the island. By the second day, they take the Japanese airstrip, renaming it Henderson Field. The Japanese bring in thousands of fresh troops to Guadalcanal and attack the Americans relentlessly, trying to drive them off the island. The Marines fight off attacks while desperately trying to prepare Henderson Field for operations. Japanese tractors and equipment are commandeered to improve the small crushed coral runway. Bomb damage is repaired, and PSP, perforated steel planking, is hurriedly laid down. After 2 weeks, they finish the airstrip and fly in 19 F-4F Wildcat fighters and 12 SBD Dauntless dive bombers.
It was only because of the ability of the Americans to place aircraft on Henderson Field to protect the supply ships bringing in reinforcements and supplies to the Marines on Guadalcanal that the island could be held.
Because the Allied code name for Guadalcanal is Cactus, Henderson Field becomes the home of the tiny Cactus Air Force, at first consisting of just 43 pilots and ground crew. The men of Henderson Field soon discover it isn't just the enemy making their lives hell.
The island was a fly-infested, dirty, stinking, blood-soaked, damned island that was just dangerous to even walk on the beaches because there was so much unexploded ammunition around.
The pilots and ground crew live in mud-floored tents. The latrine is a trench with a log seat, and the bathtub is the Lunga River, complete with crocodiles and leeches. The flyers of the Cactus Air Force are outnumbered and short on supplies. Their fighter, the F-4F Wildcat, can't match the agility of the enemy Zero. But a big advantage for the Cactus Air Force is that they are commanded by a born leader in 27-year-old John Smith. Smith's an aggressive dogfighter and skilled tactician.
He always preached and devised his tactics around you have to pit your strengths against the enemy's weakness. And that is as true today as it ever was since the first airplane ever flew in combat.
Now, on August 30th, 1942, Captain John Smith and his men are protecting Guadalcanal from approaching bombers and fighters. In his 8 days on the island, Smith has already scored 5 kills, making him an ace. Today, he's racked up 1 more. Then he spots another Zero below, breaking from a cloud. The Zero is here. Smith is here, high above him. He plans to use the Wildcat's diving speed to try and drop behind the Japanese plane. Smith first rolls inverted, then dives. This creates positive G-force instead of negative Gs.
You roll on your back, pull aft on the stick, and pull positive Gs so you're pushed into your seat. You can be able to pull more Gs, which means you can pull your nose downhill faster.
The maneuver works. Smith rolls back over, then levels out behind the Zero and fires. The Wildcat's 6 .50 caliber guns delivered 200 rounds in a 4-second burst. White-hot, phosphorus-filled incendiary bullets ignite the Zero's fuel tank. But as Smith arcs away from his second victim, the predator becomes the prey. A Japanese Zero closes in on Smith from dead ahead. High above the green jungle canopy of Guadalcanal, the planes converge at over 600 miles per hour.
Think of a high-speed game of chicken going directly at your target, and no one wants to flinch, because if you flinch, you become defensive. And you have to be pointing at the target to shoot them, so it has to be head-to-head.
Once in range, the Zero opens up with his 20mm cannon. Smith answers with his .50 caliber machine guns.
It's basically that slugfest all the way to the merge. Who's going to flinch first, or who's going to blow up first?
Both planes are taking hits, but Smith's Wildcat has thicker armor and he's withstanding the blows.
And then the overwhelming firepower of the Navy airplane cut this guy into ribbons. He exploded. And then what Smith did is dump the nose over very hard, very abruptly, and flew underneath the debris field and escaped.
The Zero has made a fatal error. He fought the Wildcat's fight. Built by Grumman Aircraft, the Wildcat is first flown in 1937. The rugged plane features cockpit armor and self-sealing fuel tanks. These tanks are coated with layers of rubber that expand and reseal if they're punctured. The Wildcat faces the most famous of all Japanese aircraft, the deadly Mitsubishi A6M30. The lightweight Zero can outturn and outclimb the Wildcat, a lethal advantage in a dogfight. But its thin armor protection and lack of self-sealing fuel tanks means it can't survive a slugging match with the tougher Wildcat.
Essentially, in fighter versus fighter combat, the difference between the Wildcat and the Zero is the difference between a battle axe and a rapier. They can both be effective, but they're used somewhat differently.
The Zero is faster, more maneuverable, and can outclimb the Wildcat, while the Grumman is tougher, more heavily armed, and can outdive the Zero.
Wildcat pilots in general would want to avoid the turning fight with the Zero. That would not be their fight. The Wildcat with its 6 .50 cal machine guns, heavy body armor, heavy armor around the engine cowling, preferred head-on attacks, frontal attacks, and it would just basically plow through that Zero.
The air battle of August 30th is a resounding victory for Smith and his pilots. They shoot down 14 of the 22 attacking Zeros. The Japanese bombers the Zeros were protecting retreat before reaching Guadalcanal. July 4th, 1944. 4:30 a.m. Under cover of night, 4 American planes of VFN-76, one of the U.S. Navy's first night fighter squadrons, make their way to the island of Chichijima in the Pacific. The 4 Grumman F-6F Hellcats are radar-equipped, a new technology that uses radio waves to detect and track other aircraft in total darkness. Their instrument panels glow in dim red light to preserve night vision. 21-year-old Buck Dungan flies element lead.
The Hellcat was such a stable machine, we all fell in love with it.
Dungan and his wingman, Johnny Deere, split off from their flight lead. They each carry one 500-pound bomb to hit shipping in Futami Cove. The drone of the Hellcat's Pratt & Whitney engines is heard for miles around, alerting the Japanese to the specter of an American attack. Enemy anti-aircraft gunners fire blindly into the night sky. Dungan steers clear of the tracers while using his compass, altimeter, and artificial horizon to navigate, called flying on instruments. Though nighttime combat had occurred as early as World War I, it wasn't until the advent of this sort of advanced instrumentation in the late 1930s that true night fighting and navigation was possible. Soon, Dungan spots a target in the water below, a lightly armored Japanese destroyer escort.
We saw a small ship leaving the harbor, and it had an umbrella of fire above it. So I said, Johnny, let's make a low-side run.
The Hellcats drop to wave-top level for the risky broadside attack. Dungan carefully monitors his altimeter and artificial horizon to avoid hitting the water. The gunners on board the Japanese destroyer have no idea where the night fighters are coming from. Dungan unleashes a torrent of .50 caliber ammunition at the ship.
A .50 caliber slug is as big around as your thumb, and about as long too. At 2,400 rounds per minute from 6 guns meeting at one place, it's going to knock holes in just about anything.
To preserve night vision, the Hellcats don't use tracers.
Even without the tracers, you have a great flash, but you don't look at it. You keep your eyesight way ahead, away from light.
Dungan and Deere pull hard back on their sticks to climb over the top of the destroyer escort.
I said, Johnny, the upstairs is open for us. They're inviting us in. And so we made a high side run.
Below them, the ship's gunners still have no idea where the Americans are. The Japanese begin firing low, out over the water. Dungan and Deere rake the deck, firing down the smokestack directly into the engines. Flames erupt and smoke belches from the wounded ship. It is dead in the water. The Hellcats turn their attention to the island itself. They split up, each patrolling his own sector of sky.
In night fighting, you assign an area because then anyone you see is not friendly, and he's a target.
Suddenly, a shadow passes overhead. It's a Japanese Navy Zero equipped with amphibious floats. Undetected, Dungan closes on his enemy's 6 o'clock.
I knew the Fuel was carried in the float, so I aimed on the strut between the float and the cockpit and just touched the trigger, just one little.
The Zero bursts into flame and plummets. The explosion has given away the night fighter's position. Suddenly, tracers rip through the night sky.
And I turned and looked, and I had 3 in back of me who were firing at me.
Buck Dungan's top secret training as a Navy night fighter is about to be put to the test. In 1943, Buck Dungan joined the U.S. Navy's night fighter program, codenamed Project Affirm, based at Quonset Point in Rhode Island. Project Affirm and almost all other night fighter programs utilized a technology that in World War II was only in its infancy: radar. Radar, or radio detection and ranging, uses radio waves to detect objects beyond visual range. Radio energy is transmitted from an antenna. Objects in the sky reflect some of this energy back to a detector, where these radar returns can be processed and used to determine the distance to the target, altitude, and direction of travel.
Next to the atomic bomb, the development and various forms of radar was the #2 priority for both America and the British. The radars were big, bulky pieces of equipment, vacuum tubes, and a lot of heat and needed a lot of power that the airplanes of the day just couldn't deliver. So the British did a lot of the development of these early radars to be able to fit inside still fairly large aircraft, twin engine versus, say, a Spitfire.
This new radar, called Airborne Intercept, allowed night fighters to track individual aircraft in total darkness. The British shared the technology with the U.S. Navy in 1940. By 1942, radar sets could fit on single-engine fighters. Project Affirm, America's first night fighter training program, was born. Now, Project Affirm night fighter Buck Dungan is in the crosshairs of 3 Japanese roofs. But luckily, his wingman, Johnny Deere, is in the area, still undetected by the enemy.
And he said, "Buck, are you all right?" And I said, "I've got some company. I'm having all this fun by myself. I'm going to invite you to the party."
Dungan is here. Deere is here. Dungan plans to lead the enemy fighters directly into his wingman's line of fire. Johnny Deere streaks in, using the Japanese gunfire as an aiming reference against the night sky. Deere has claimed 2 of the roofs, but there's still one left, behind Dungan. Dungan must reverse direction quickly to turn the tables on the remaining roof.
I made a real fast, kill your speed turn, you know, up like that, and he pulled around and came in on the fella down here. He just kept coming right at me, and he was firing, and I gave him a short burst. And he blew up.
Dungan and Deere once again split up to search for new targets. Dim, pre-dawn light breaks on the horizon. Suddenly, Dungan spots more tracer fire arcing towards him. He's been spotted.
I saw a plane coming toward me about 3 miles away, and his guns were all firing.
The inexperienced Japanese pilot is firing too soon. He runs out of ammo. Dungan carefully puts the pipper on the roof's silhouette and fires. He's made quick work of his opponent.